A patient confesses to murder. Just kidding. But we do have a real legal puzzle today.
Oh.
Yeah, it hinges on something someone said, well, typed actually, in messages on their phone.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's after they were stopped at an airport, Hong Kong airport, with nearly 4 kilograms of cocaine hidden in their luggage.
Wow, okay. 4 kilos. That's serious.
Exactly. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone, where we sift through these complex stories to pull out the crucial insights.
And today, we're focusing on this real case out of Hong Kong. The person involved, we're calling him Zhang San. That's a pseudonym, obviously, to protect his privacy.
Right. So our mission, if you choose to accept it,
Always.
is to figure out why a lower court initially threw out a drug trafficking case against this Zhang San. It was all about questions around evidence from his phone.
And then, crucially, why a higher court stepped in and overturned that decision. We'll unpack the facts, the legal arguments.
And yeah, some pretty surprising twists that make this case, well, really compelling.
Definitely. And our source for this deep dive is a detailed legal judgment. It's from the Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal, dated November 14th, 2022.
So we have the official record. This document lays out the whole legal journey, right from the arrest.
All the way to that final appeal.
So get ready to have your understanding of evidence, legal procedure, and maybe even the power of digital chat challenged a bit. Okay, let's dig in.
Let's do it. So it starts September 10th, 2019, Hong Kong International Airport.
Okay.
Zhang San lands. He's flown in from São Paulo, Brazil, via Zurich in Switzerland.
Long trip.
Very. Customs officers intercept him. They search his 2 suitcases and find these false compartments.
The classic sign.
Inside, 300 and 941 grams of a solid substance.
Which turned out to be?
Cocaine. 312 grams of actual cocaine after analysis. The estimated market value. About HK $4.97 million.
Nearly 5 million Hong Kong dollars. That's a staggering amount.
It really is. So he's arrested. Under caution, he gives an initial story.
What did he say first?
He said he was just in Hong Kong for property business. Claimed a guy named Jimmy asked him to take the suitcases from Brazil to Zurich, then Hong Kong.
Just doing a favor, basically.
That was the implication. Someone was supposed to contact him at the Miramar Hotel to pick them up. Authorities tried to control delivery, let him go to the hotel.
But it failed.
Yeah, didn't work out. Nobody showed, or they couldn't make the connection.
Okay, so that's story number 1, but you mentioned twists.
Right. Later, in a video interview, also under caution, Zhang San tells a completely different story.
Oh. This is where it gets interesting.
Very. He claims he met a woman online, Yolanda.
Yolanda, okay.
Developed a romantic relationship, he says. And Yolanda asked him to go to Brazil to receive some confidential documents.
Confidential documents, what kind?
Supposedly related to her great-grandfather's inheritance. A big one, US $10 million.
Right. Online romance, secret inheritance. This sounds familiar in some ways.
It does have those elements. He then says he'd already done one trip like this from Brazil to London. The Hong Kong trip was his second run.
Second time carrying mysterious luggage for this online connection.
Apparently, he said both trips were organized by 2 other people, Jimmy Rowland and Anthony Campbell.
The same Jimmy from the first story? Or a different one?
The documents specify Jimmy Rowland here. He and Anthony Campbell claim to work for the United Nations Association.
The UN Association. Handling a private inheritance. That sounds fishy.
It raises eyebrows, certainly. They were supposedly handling Yolanda's inheritance claim.
Okay.
And according to Zhang San, Jimmy and Anthony provided the 2 suitcases.
The ones with the drugs.
The very ones. But Zhang San's story was he thought he was carrying confidential documents, like bearer bonds.
Bearer bonds for the inheritance.
Yeah, meant to be used to get funds. He thought they were hidden in false compartments because they hadn't been approved for export by Brazilian authorities. That was his explanation for the secrecy.
So he's painting himself as an unwitting mule.
Whoa.
Completely duped.
That's the picture. He denied knowing anything about the drugs, said he didn't even think people could still smuggle drugs through customs like that.
Did he get paid?
He admitted getting some expense money, US $900 and $200 from Jimmy and Anthony for the Brazil part, and he was promised US $2,500 more for hotel, transfers, meals when he delivered the documents.
And these people, Yolanda, Jimmy, Anthony, he'd never met them in person.
Never. All communication was remote. WhatsApp with Yolanda and Jimmy, email with Anthony.
That distance, the online-only contact, it definitely adds a layer, doesn't it? It makes his story maybe slightly more plausible or maybe easier to manipulate him.
It cuts both ways, absolutely. So the key question for the drug trafficking charge became, His knowledge. Did he know he was carrying cocaine?
Or could he have genuinely, honestly believed this elaborate story about inheritance documents? His state of mind.
Exactly. That's the core issue. Did he know, or was he willfully blind or truly deceived?
Okay, so he's charged, remanded in custody. What happens next with the evidence, particularly that phone?
Well, during the case management hearings, they started agreeing on some basic facts. Draft agreed facts were submitted.
Standard procedure.
Right. And these noted that a customs officer, Chung Sin-ying, seized Zhang San's phone that became Exhibit P60 the day after his arrival, and they got a search warrant later to examine it.
Exhibit P60, the phone.
Got it.
Then, customs inspectors Cho Kin-lung and Lung Hokpan and Officer Kwok Si-lok did that video interview with Zhang Sen we mentioned, in English.
Okay.
A few days after that, on September 15th and 17th, Officer Chung took photos of the WhatsApp messages on the phone screen between Zhang San and Yolanda and Zhang San and Jimmy.
Photos of the screen, not like a forensic download initially.
Not initially, it seems. These photos became exhibits P80, P81, and P82.
Okay, so physical photos of the digital chat.
Yes. Then later, November 2nd, a technical officer, acting senior customs officer Chun Salai, did examine the phone. He confirmed the WhatsApp messages were there, no signs of interference with the messages themselves.
But then the judge stepped in. Exactly. The trial judge, Justice Kimbry, again, a pseudonym, she raised concerns about whether these photos, and maybe the phone data in general, could even be used as evidence.
Why? What was the specific problem?
She ordered a case within a case, basically, a mini trial just on the admissibility of this evidence.
A trial within a trial.
Okay. Her main criticism was how customs handled the phone. She pointed out that just accessing the phone changes its hash value.
Right, the digital fingerprint. It proves the data hasn't been tampered with since it was last calculated.
Precisely. But, the judge noted, there was no record kept of when the phone was accessed or how. It had apparently been accessed multiple times before the formal forensic exam without these records.
That sounds like a gap in the chain of custody for digital evidence.
That was the judge's concern. Plus, she noted the discrepancy in data extraction. It was a 64 GB phone, looked like about 40 GB was used.
But they only got about half of that.
Yeah, only 19.7 GB was retrieved during the forensic examination later, which raised questions for her. Where was the rest? Was the extraction complete? Was something missed or deleted?
Okay, so concerns about undocumented access, potential data alteration, and incomplete extraction.
Based on all that, the trial judge made a huge call. She ruled that any data recovered from that phone, Exhibit P60, was inadmissible, couldn't be used.
Wow, all of it, including those WhatsApp photos.
Everything. She cited the improper handling, the lack of records when they accessed it, even when showing it to Zhang San during his interview, and what she called insecure access beforehand.
That's a massive blow, potentially to either side, depending on what those messages actually said.
Huge. And following that ruling, Zhang San's defense team immediately applied for a permanent stay of the proceedings.
Meaning, stop the trial altogether.
Yes. Their argument was straightforward. Without the WhatsApp messages, Zhang San couldn't get a fair trial.
Why? Because he wanted to use them.
Exactly. They argued he needed those messages to back up his defense, to show the communications he received, to support his claim that he didn't know about the drugs because he'd been fed this whole Yolanda inheritance story.
So the defense saw the messages as key to proving his lack of guilty knowledge.
Precisely. And on March 14th, 2022, the trial judge agreed with them. She granted the permanent stay, stopped the trial, indicated she'd order his release.
Why did she agree? What was her reasoning?
She basically said her own ruling making the WhatsApp evidence inadmissible had fundamentally damaged Zhang San's ability to defend himself. She felt he couldn't properly present his side of the story, his claim of being deceived, without that evidence.
So she excluded the evidence, and then said because the evidence was excluded, the trial couldn't be fair.
That's the logic. She cited a precedent, HKSR v. Li Ming-Ti and another, and said Zhang San had met the burden of proof to show a fair trial was now impossible. She specifically rejected the idea that he could just, tell the jury about the messages while testifying.
Implying the actual messages themselves were crucial.
Yes, that having the documented proof of the communication was vital for his defense. So, consequence. Permanent stay ordered. Trial over, effectively.
But the prosecution wasn't having it.
Not at all. They immediately sought leave, permission, to appeal this permanent stay decision to the highest court, the Court of Final Appeal. And they asked for Zhang San to be kept in custody during the appeal.
Makes sense, given the seriousness of the charge. What did the trial judge say to that?
Initially, she granted conditional bail. He couldn't leave Hong Kong.
Okay, standard enough.
But then, just a few days later, on March 18th, after she formally issued her written reasons for the stay, she changed her mind on the bail.
Changed it how?
She allowed him to leave Hong Kong, stipulated he had to live at a specific address in Aberdeenshire, Scotland, and keep in touch with his lawyer.
Scotland. Wait. She lets a man accused of trafficking nearly $5 million worth of cocaine leave the country while the prosecution is appealing the dismissal of his case.
That's what happened, it seems. Well, extraordinary.
To say the least. Did he leave?
He did. Left Hong Kong 2 days later, March 20th, 2022, and he was still out of the country, in Scotland presumably, when the Court of Final Appeal heard the case.
Unbelievable. So what did the Court of Final Appeal do? Did they grant the prosecution's appeal?
Yes, the appeal committee granted leave to appeal the stay. They saw it as a matter of potential, substantial, and grave injustice if the stay was wrongly granted.
And they also agreed to look at the bail issue separately.
They did. They granted leave on that specific legal question, too. What are the rules around bail when a permanent stay is granted to a foreign defendant with few local ties, and the prosecution says, hey, we're appealing this? Can the judge set conditions that basically make the appeal pointless?
Okay, so two big questions for the top court. First, was the stay correct, which meant revisiting the evidence ruling. And second, was letting him leave on bail appropriate?
Exactly. So let's get into the Court of Final Appeal's reasoning. First, they tackled whether the prosecution could even challenge the trial judge's ruling on the WhatsApp messages at this stage.
The defense probably argued it was too late, or the wrong venue.
They did. Argued it was an interim decision, not the final outcome. But the Court of Final Appeal said, no, hang on. The appeal is against the permanent stay.
Which was the final outcome of the trial.
Right. And that stay was based entirely on the ruling that the WhatsApp messages were inadmissible. So you can't review the stay without reviewing the reason for it. They found the prosecution absolutely could challenge the admissibility ruling as part of this appeal.
Okay, makes sense. So what did they think of the trial judge's decision to exclude the WhatsApp evidence?
They found she'd made a fundamental error, a really crucial one concerning the hearsay rule.
Hearsay. That's always tricky. How did it apply here? Or not apply?
Well, the court clarified that hearsay didn't apply to these messages in the way Zhang San wanted to use them.
Why not? They're out-of-court statements, aren't they?
Yes, but think about why Zhang San wanted to use them. He wasn't trying to prove that Yolanda actually had a $10 million inheritance, or that Jimmy really worked for the UN Association. That wasn't the point.
Okay, so what was the point?
The point was to show what he was told, to show the communications he received, the story he was fed. That's directly relevant to his state of mind, his defense that he was misled and didn't know about the drugs.
Ah, I see. It's not, this message is true, it's, this is the message I got, and this is why I believed I was carrying documents.
Exactly. The court said out-of-court statements are not hearsay if they're offered simply to prove the statement was made, and thus could have affected the recipient's state of mind, rather than to prove the truth of what the statement asserts.
That's a critical distinction.
Huge. They cited several previous cases confirming this principle, and they also said the trial judge misapplied another rule, Section 22A of the Evidence Ordinance about computer documents, for the same reason the messages weren't being used to prove the facts stated in them.
So the whole basis for excluding the messages based on hearsay or computer evidence rules was wrong, according to the higher court.
Fundamentally flawed, yes.
Yeah.
Then they looked at the trial judge's other concerns, the phone handling, the hash values, the incomplete data.
What did they say about those?
They said the trial judge confused admissibility with weight and reliability.
Okay, what's the difference in this context?
Admissibility is the first hurdle. Is this evidence legally allowed to be considered at all? The judge decides this, but the threshold is usually just establishing a basic or prima facie case that the evidence is authentic, that it seems to be what it purports to be.
Like, does it look like genuine WhatsApp messages from his phone?
Pretty much. Weight and reliability, on the other hand, are about how much you should believe the evidence, how convincing it is. And that the Court of Final Appeal stressed is for the jury to decide after the evidence is admitted.
So the trial judge jumped the gun, essentially. She started weighing the evidence instead of just deciding if it was admissible on a basic level.
That was the Court of Final Appeal's view. They cited cases like R.V. Robson, saying the judge's role at the admissibility stage is just to see if there's a prima facie case of authenticity, its origin, its history.
And was there a prima facie case here?
Easily, according to the Court of Final Appeal. They pointed out several things. First, Neither the prosecution nor the defense were actually challenging the authenticity of the messages.
Wait, really? Not even the defense who wanted to use them?
No. In fact, they were planning to formally agree that the phone contents, including the messages, were authentic.
So the trial judge held a whole mini-trial on authenticity when nobody was even disputing it.
It seems that way. The Court of Final Appeal also noted the sheer number of messages, over 3,900 downloaded, formed a coherent chain. Zhang San himself had admitted to customs, these were his chats, and the content seemed to match his story about Yolanda and the inheritance.
So lots of indicators they were genuine, or at least genuinely from his phone.
And the only technical evidence from that senior customs officer, Chan, suggested that while, yeah, accessing the phone might change some metadata.
Like the hash value.
Right. It wouldn't have affected the content of the WhatsApp messages themselves, which is what Zhang San needed.
So the technical concerns didn't actually undermine the specific evidence he wanted to rely on.
Correct. Therefore, the Court of Final Appeal concluded there was no sufficient reason for the trial judge to hold that case within a case on authenticity, and her ruling that the evidence was inadmissible was simply wrong.
Okay. And since the only reason she granted the permanent stay was because she wrongly excluded that evidence.
Exactly. The foundation for the stay completely disappeared. The Court of Final Appeal found the trial judge had improperly exercised her discretion by basing it on this irrelevant factor, the incorrect inadmissibility ruling.
And they emphasized that stopping a trial is a drastic step.
Extremely drastic. A measure of last resort, only for the most exceptional cases where a fair trial is truly impossible. Since the evidence should have been admitted, a fair trial was still possible here.
So the final decision on the stay
Overturned. The Court of Final Appeal quashed the trial judge's order granting the permanent stay. The prosecution could proceed.
Wow, okay, case back on. But then there's the elephant in the room. Zhang San is in Scotland. What about the bail issue?
Right. The Court of Final Appeal addressed that too. They looked at the law governing bail when an appeal like this is happening, Section 35(2) of their ordinance.
And what does that say?
It gives the court discretion. If the defendant would have been in custody but for the decision being appealed, like the permanent stay, the appeal court can order detention or release on bail with conditions.
So they could grant bail, but it's discretionary.
Yes. And the court emphasized the primary aim here, ensuring the fair and effective administration of justice.
Which letting the defendant leave the country arguably prevents.
That was exactly their point. They stated very clearly. When the prosecution says they intend to appeal a stay, it's generally inappropriate to set bail conditions that create a significant risk. The defendant, foreign or not, will just leave and be unavailable if the appeal succeeds.
Because that makes the whole appeal pointless.
Precisely. It undermines the entire justice system. In this case, Zhang San was in custody before the stay. But for that stay decision, he'd still be locked up.
So the legal question they agreed to answer: can a judge impose bail conditions that might render an appeal meaningless?
They answered that with a firm no. They concluded the trial judge erred in changing Zhang San's bail to allow him to leave Hong Kong while the appeal was pending.
So they overturned the bail orders too?
Yes, the orders from March 15th and 18th, 2022 were overturned.
What does that mean practically, though, since he's already gone?
Well, the Court of Final Appeal noted the prosecution could now take the case back to the lower court, the court of first instance, maybe before a different judge, to get orders to continue the prosecution if possible.
If possible, doing a lot of work there.
Indeed. Legally, since his bail was revoked, he's now subject to a remand order again, if he doesn't return voluntarily.
An arrest warrant, extradition.
An arrest warrant could be issued. Getting him back from Scotland is, of course, another matter entirely. The court acknowledged the uncertainty.
Okay, so summing this all up, what are the big takeaways from this whole legal saga?
Well, first, it really underscores how vital it is to understand the rules of evidence, especially now with digital stuff everywhere. It's not just what the evidence says,
but why you're presenting it. The purpose matters hugely.
Exactly. Those WhatsApp messages weren't about proving Yolanda was real. They were about showing Zhang San's state of mind, what he was potentially led to believe. That's a fundamental distinction the first judge missed.
And the higher court corrected.
Right. And the case also highlights the balancing act courts perform, ensuring a fair trial for the accused,
while also making sure the justice system itself isn't undermined, like by letting someone skip town during an appeal.
That's a crucial part of it, the integrity of the whole process.
So here's where it gets really interesting for me, and maybe for you listening. This whole situation, needing the highest court to step in on basic evidence rules for digital messages. It really shows how complex this area is, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The law is constantly playing catch-up with technology.
So the big question this raises for you, the listener, is how do our legal systems need to adapt? How do we handle digital evidence fairly, ensuring the rights of the accused, but also allowing for effective prosecution of crime, especially serious crime like this?
It's a tough balance. If you want to explore further, maybe look into the specific evidence rules in your own country or state about hearsay and digital evidence. It varies quite a bit.
Yeah, and think about the challenges for police and prosecutors in maintaining that digital chain of custody we talked about. How do you prove a phone or computer hasn't been tampered with?
And the ethical side, too. When someone claims ignorance based on online chats like Zhang San did, how do courts evaluate that? How much weight should be given to digital interactions versus, real-world actions?
Okay, our final provocative thought for you to mull over, inspired by this case. A lie shatters a family truth, finishes it. Zhang San presented his version of the truth, built around those WhatsApp messages.
The courts wrestled with whether he should even get the chance to fully present that version.
So, think about this. What do you reckon the ultimate impact of this whole legal battle will be? Regardless of whether Zhang San ever actually faces that jury in Hong Kong again, does the process itself reveal deeper truths?
We'd genuinely love to hear what you think. We'll put a poll up on our website, and social media let us know your perspective on this really complex intersection of drugs, digital trails, and the law.